Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're not just looking at ancient history. We're diving into a text from over 2,500 years ago that, well, it uncannily predicts so much of our own world. You know, power struggles, political polarization, the brutal calculus of survival.
hmm
Thucydides' account of the Peloponnesian War isn't just battles and sieges, it's this chillingly relevant masterclass in human nature under pressure. It really shows us how societies behave when, everything is on the line.
And for this particular deep dive, we've really gone right into the heart of Thucydides' own monumental work. Our mission really is to be your expert guides here, digging out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Right.
We want to make these really complex philosophical and historical ideas accessible for you, even if you're completely brand new to this fascinating subject. So we'll break down key terms, maybe use some everyday analogies, and walk you through the crucial moments step by step.
Yeah, the goal is that by the end of this, you'll be well informed and hopefully have a few of those aha moments about how the past still speaks to us today. So let's start with the man himself, Thucydides. What exactly makes his approach to writing history so groundbreaking, so different from what came before him?
That's a great question because what's truly remarkable here is how he pioneered this revolutionary way of understanding the past. He wasn't just collecting stories. He was essentially inventing scientific history in a
That's
way.
scientific history, wow.
Yeah. Unlike earlier writers like, the epic poets such as Homer, famous for his tales of the Trojan War, or even other prose chroniclers like Herodotus, Thucydides had this relentless, almost obsessive quest for verifiable truth.
Okay.
He explicitly criticized Homer and other poets for, quote, embellishing with their exaggerations. For instance, he looked at the Trojan War and basically said, hold on a minute, was it really that grand?
Mm-hmm.
He argued it was probably far less spectacular than the myths suggested, simply because of the logistical and financial constraints of ancient armies. I mean, they just didn't have the resources for a 10-year siege of that supposed scale.
So he was kind of fact-checking the legends, calling out the storytellers for not sticking to the facts. That sounds incredibly modern, almost like a skeptical journalist.
Exactly. And he also took aim at other prose chroniclers, saying they wrote more for attractive listening than for truthfulness.
Mhm.
He felt their accounts couldn't really be checked, and they often lost credibility over time because they were more about maybe patriotic fiction than objective truth.
Right. Stuff people wanted to believe.
Precisely.
Mm.
Thucydides, on the other hand, insisted on using the clearest possible evidence for his account. He was basically saying, forget the myths, forget the dramatic flair, let's look at the facts, the evidence, not just the good stories. It's really a foundational principle for anyone trying to understand what actually happened.
But even with that intense focus on accuracy, did he ever admit that he might have a point of view? Or maybe even blind spots?
This is where his intellectual honesty truly shines, and is one of the most powerful insights he offers, I think. Thucydides himself notes that his historical accuracy is, quote, consistently and acutely challenged. He knew that scholars, even back then, could find him deeply biased, especially in favor of Athens and against Sparta.
He admits it. That's pretty amazing.
He openly admits it. He even points out common historical errors that Athenians themselves believed. Like, for example, many Athenians thought Hipparchus was the tyrant who was killed, but actually it was his older brother Hippias who held the real power.
Okay.
Or they incorrectly believed Spartan kings cast 2 votes instead of 1. Or, this is a good one, that a mythical Pittite army division existed in Sparta, which Thucydides just flat out states never existed.
Wow, that's incredibly self-aware for an ancient writer.
Wow.
So what's the big takeaway for us from that kind of admission? What's he telling us?
The profound insight here is that Thucydides, by admitting his own potential bias and highlighting this widespread misinformation, is giving you, the reader or listener, a really powerful lesson. He's implying you should question everything they read to arrive at your own informed understanding.
Right. Don't just accept things at face value.
Exactly. He's basically a proponent of critical thinking before the term even existed. It's a call to actively engage with information, to be skeptical, and to seek out evidence for yourself, rather than simply accepting what you're told. It's such a timeless message about media literacy, really.
Absolutely. And what about those famous speeches he includes? We know they can't be verbatim transcripts from 2,500 years ago, so how does Thucydides justify putting words into people's mouths, especially when he seems so committed to verifiable fact?
You've hit on a crucial point there. His inclusion of speeches, and he's quite clear that they're not word-for-word records, is vital for conveying the arguments, the mindsets, the prevailing attitudes of the participants. He tells us they reflect his interpretation of what was said, or maybe what it seemed to me would have been said for each occasion. So think of them not as literal quotes, but as expertly crafted dramatic representations of the core arguments.
So like the spirit of the argument, not the exact words.
Precisely. And the emotional and intellectual currents driving the historical actors. They allow him to explore the why behind decisions. Why did Athens make that choice? What were the leaders thinking? What ideas were popular in the assembly at the time?
It adds a whole other dimension.
It really does. It's his way of letting us understand the prevailing intellectual climate and the dilemmas faced by leaders and citizens. It's about getting into the psychological and ideological framework of the time, even if the exact words are his own reconstruction based on what he believed was most likely said, and importantly, the character of the speaker. It adds a layer of depth you just don't get from only chronicling events.
He also starts his entire work with something he calls the archaeology. Now that sounds like digging up old bones, but it's not quite that, is it? What's he trying to prove with this section?
No, you're right. It's definitely not archaeology in our modern sense of uncovering artifacts like pottery or ancient buildings. His archaeology is this brief account of early Greek history, and it serves a very specific purpose for him:
Which is?
to survey the past and justify the unique magnitude of the Peloponnesian War. He argues that past conflicts, even the legendary Trojan War we just talked about, were simply not on a large scale compared to the conflict he was about to chronicle.
So he's setting the stage, saying this war is different, this one is huge.
Exactly. He wanted to show you, the listener, that his war was truly unprecedented in its scope and impact, the biggest thing in Greek history up to that point. He's basically saying what you're about to read is a real game changer.
Okay. And what kind of picture does he paint of that early Greek history?
Well, in this archaeology, he paints a fascinating picture of early Hellas, that's ancient Greece, not as some settled, glorious place, but as a chaotic, constantly shifting landscape. He says it was not a land securely settled long ago. Think of it like a wild frontier where people were always on the move.
Constantly migrating.
Yeah. They readily abandoned its territory under pressure from anyone more numerous, always seeking just the minimal daily subsistence anywhere. This led to a lack of commerce, a lack of fortifications. People couldn't really settle down, build up wealth, or create stable societies. It was a world built on impermanence, where constant conflict was kind of the norm, and survival was the main goal.
So in this chaotic early world, how did Athens, the future superpower, manage to find stability? That seems counterintuitive.
Athens was a striking contrast, and it's an interesting twist he points out. Thucydides explains that Attica, the region around Athens, had poor soil. Now, this seemingly disadvantageous trait actually worked in its favor.
How so? Poor soil seems like a bad thing.
Well, because its land wasn't as rich or coveted as places like Thessaly or Boeotia, which were constantly racked by internal factional strife and external attacks, Attica became without faction from remotest times and was always occupied by the same people.
So nobody really bothered fighting over it because the land wasn't great.
Pretty much. And because it was less desirable, it became a secure refuge for the most capable people driven from other parts of Hellas by war or internal conflict. These refugees were granted citizenship, which significantly increased Athens' population over time.
So it became a magnet for talent, in a way.
Exactly. And this growth eventually led to Athens sending out its own colonies, notably to Ionia, spreading its influence and culture. So ironically, its less desirable land contributed to its long-term stability and eventual expansion into a major power. It just shows how sometimes disadvantages can become strengths under the right circumstances.
That's fascinating. And this leads to another key development he highlights, right? The rise of sea power.
Yes, and this leads us directly to another pivotal development he highlights: the rise of sea power. Thucydides notes that as Hellas became stronger and wealthier, tyrannies, which it's important to remember, in ancient Greece referred to a form of hereditary monarchy with restricted powers, not necessarily the oppressive dictatorships we think of today, began to emerge in most cities due to increased revenues.
Okay.
Crucially, the Hellenes started equipping navies and becoming more active at sea. He credits the Corinthians as being the first to develop ships almost like those of his day, and Corinth was the first place in Hellas where triremes were built.
Triremes, those are the big warships, right? 3 banks of oars.
That's them, these sleek, powerful warships. He even points to the earliest known sea battle between the Corinthians and the Corcyraeans, which happened about 260 years before the end of the Peloponnesian War. This emphasis on naval development is absolutely key.
Why so key?
Because it highlights the shift toward sea power becoming the dominant force, transforming warfare and trade across the Greek world. It's a critical early indicator of the type of war. Athens, with its amazing natural harbors, would eventually fight, and the kind of power it would come to wield. It foreshadows everything.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. How did these two ancient superpowers, Athens and Sparta, find themselves on this collision course leading to such a devastating war? Thucydides really digs into the deep-seated causes, doesn't he? Not just the immediate storks.
He absolutely does. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Thucydides identifies the fundamental underlying cause of the war not as a single event, but as a long-term strategic tension. The growth of Athenian power and Spartan fear of it.
The classic rising power versus established power dynamics.
This wasn't a sudden development, but a slow burn over decades. He refers to this period as the 50 years, or the Pentacontatia, which was roughly 479 to 431 BCE, right after the Persian Wars. This era saw Athens really solidify its rise to dominance.
And how did that start? How did Athens build that power so quickly?
Well, immediately after the Medes, as the Persians withdrew from Greece, Themistocles, a truly visionary Athenian statesman, pushed hard for Athenian fortification. He understood that a strong city needed strong defenses, especially its port.
The Piraeus.
The Piraeus, exactly, Athens' port. He famously championed its fortification, recognizing its three natural harbors as a massive advantage for building sea power. He was, in Thucydides' words, the first person bold enough to tell them to take to the sea, urging them to invest heavily in their navy.
That sounds like a huge strategic shift for a city-state.
It was radical. He even advised that if the Athenians were ever hard-pressed on land, they should come down and use their ships to stand off the whole world. This was a truly bold, almost unheard-of vision for a people traditionally focused on land, shifting their strategic focus entirely to the sea. It laid the groundwork for their future empire, making naval might their defining characteristic.
So the Athenian Empire wasn't just built by conquest then. You mentioned it was also by invitation at first. And then it seems like it became something darker, driven by fear and self-interest. That's quite a complex recipe for dominance.
Precisely. Thucydides explains that Athens didn't initially seize its empire purely by force. After the Persian Wars, Sparta was kind of unwilling to continue campaigning against the remaining Persian threat. So the allies, many smaller Greek city-states of their own accord, begged Athens to lead them. They were looking for a strong protector, really.
Okay, so it started somewhat voluntarily.
Initially, yes. But as time went on, the empire's expansion and, crucially, its maintenance became compelled by fear of revolt, fear of rivals, then by prestige, the desire to maintain their powerful image, and later out of self-interest.
The need to keep the tribute flowing, perhaps.
Absolutely. It highlights this timeless dynamic of holding power. Once you have it, it becomes incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, to let go, especially when you're resented by many and surrounded by potential rivals like Sparta. It's a cycle where power feeds on itself, and often the means start justifying the ends.
And this slow burn, this growing power and fear eventually led to a flashpoint, right? A series of final ultimatums from Sparta. How did Pericles, Athens' leading statesman at the time, advise the Athenians to respond to these escalating demands?
Right. The immediate triggers for the war involved a series of increasingly firm Spartan demands. Lacedaemonian, or Spartan ambassadors, repeatedly insisted that Athens lift the siege of Plataea, a city that had revolted from Athens.
Okay.
They also demanded that Athens leave Aegina, an island, autonomous, meaning independent, and crucially, that they revoked the Megarian decree.
Yes, the Megarian decree. What exactly was that again?
This decree banned Megarians from all ports of the Athenian Empire and even the market of Attica itself. The official Athenian justification was that Megara had cultivated consecrated land and was harboring runaway slaves. Whether that was the whole story, well, it certainly hurt Megara economically.
So these were specific demands. What was Sparta's final message?
Their final, unambiguous message was a stark choice. The Lacedaemonians wished there to be peace, and there would be if you leave the Hellenes autonomous. Essentially, stop interfering with our allies and spheres of influence, respect Greek independence, or we fight.
And Pericles, what was his advice? Did counsel compromise?
Quite the opposite. Pericles famously advised against yielding to any of these demands. He argued that even seemingly unimportant matters, like that Megarian decree, were actually a confirmation and test of your entire policy.
A test of resolve.
Exactly. He believed that yielding on even a small issue would signal weakness to Sparta and inevitably lead to another command about something more serious. Instead, a firm denial would show the Spartans clearly that they must deal with you on a more equal basis.
Like a game of chicken. Don't blink first.
It's a perfect analogy. Backing down on a minor point sends a clear signal of weakness, inviting further aggression. Pericles saw it as a matter of principle and a strategic necessity to stand firm, understanding that these small issues often become proxies for much larger tests of will and power in international relations. It was a high-stakes moment, and Athens, following Pericles, chose to hold its ground.
So the formal outbreak of the Peloponnesian War wasn't just a declaration. It started with a really brutal, localized conflict. What was this initial shock, and how quickly was it followed by that devastating, unforeseen blow to Athens itself?
This really raises an important question. How did these initial events immediately highlight the raw brutality and the profound human impact of the conflict, both on and off the battlefield? The very first violent act, marking the true beginning of the war, was the Plataean affair, described in Book 2. The 30-year truce had officially ended, and hostilities began with a shocking sneak attack.
A sneak attack? Who attacked whom?
Just over 300 Thebans, who were allies of Sparta, made an armed entry into Plataea, a city allied with Athens. And here's the twist. They were invited in by a small faction within Plataea itself, people who sought to align the city with Thebes for their own personal power.
Wow, internal division right from the start.
Absolutely. The Thebans, anticipating war was coming, wanted to seize Plataea while there was still technically peace, hoping to catch them completely off guard. They managed to get in without detection since no guard had been posted.
So did the plan work? Did they take the city?
Well, the Thebans made a crucial mistake. Instead of immediately attacking their enemies within the city, they made a friendly proclamation, hoping the whole city would come over amicably. But once the Plataeans realized how small the Theban force actually was, their initial fear turned into fierce resolve.
They decided to fight back.
Yes. The majority of Plataeans did not want to defect from Athens, so they decided to counterattack. They gathered together by cutting through house partitions. Imagine moving between adjacent apartments to avoid the streets and setting up wagons as barriers. At dawn, still in the dark, they moved out against the Thebans.
Using the darkness and their knowledge of the city? Smart.
Very smart. They knew attacking in darkness would give them a huge advantage. The Thebans would be more fearful and disoriented. They attacked immediately and quickly overpowered the Thebans. Many were killed, and many others were taken prisoner right there in the city.
And this incident quickly escalated, didn't it? And revealed a pretty grim side of the conflict, especially with those conflicting accounts you mentioned earlier. What happened next?
Yes, it did escalate. The rest of the Theban force, a much larger relief group, arrived too late. Apparently, heavy rain during the night had made their journey slower, swelling the nearby Asopos River and making it difficult to cross.
Bad luck for the Thebans.
Or maybe good luck for the Plataeans. When the relief force learned what had happened inside the city, they tried to use any Plataeans caught outside the city walls as leverage, planning to exchange them for their captured men.
Hostage-taking, essentially.
Pretty much. But the Plataeans, anticipating this, sent a herald out. They warned the Thebans that they had acted impiously by attacking during a truce, and that if the Thebans harmed any Plataeans outside the city and didn't withdraw, they would kill all the Theban prisoners they held.
A harsh threat. Did the Thebans withdraw?
They did withdraw, but then the Plataeans immediately killed their prisoners anyway.
Wow. Even after the Thebans withdrew based on their warning.
Yes. And this is a key moment for understanding Thucydides' method. He notes that this action was a contravention in terms of the Plataeans' own version of events. He also calls it uncharacteristic for him to report such conflicting accounts without resolving them definitively.
So he's showing us the messy reality of the different stories without necessarily picking a side.
Exactly. He's presenting the raw, often brutal truth without forcing a neat conclusion. This whole affair set a truly grim tone for the war. It showcased internal divisions, unexpected factors like the weather causing blunders, and the savage actions that would become all too common. It showed the brutal nature of conflict right from the very start, where promises could be broken and local grudges could explode into widespread violence.
So as Sparta inevitably invaded Attica, Pericles implemented that very specific, and I imagine deeply unpopular strategy for Athens. And then he delivered his famous funeral oration. Tell us about that strategy in the speech.
Right. Pericles, anticipating the Peloponnesian invasion of Attica, advised the Athenians to evacuate their countryside entirely and rely on their superior naval power. This is what we probably call a passive strategy today.
Letting the enemy ravage the farmlands while hiding behind the walls?
Essentially, yes. Relying on the navy to keep the city supplied and to attack the enemy elsewhere where they were weakest, like coastal raids. It demanded considerable patience and self-sacrifice from the Athenian people, as they had to watch their homes and livelihoods being destroyed by the Spartan army, camped just outside the walls.
That must have been incredibly difficult psychologically.
Immensely. And to prevent any suspicion against himself, because the Spartans had actually tried to discredit him personally by demanding Athens drive out a curse associated with his family line. Pericles even publicly offered to make his own extensive lands and buildings public property if the enemy chose to spare them.
To show he wasn't benefiting personally from the strategy.
Exactly. He wanted to ensure no one could accuse him of having some secret arrangement with the enemy. It was during this period, following the first casualties of the war, that Pericles delivered his famous funeral oration.
Which wasn't just a standard eulogy, right?
Not at all. It was far more than just eulogy for the fallen. It was, as Thucydides frames it, a powerful statement of values for Athens. He proclaimed Athens as an education for Hellas, a model, a teacher for all of Greece.
What kinds of values did he highlight?
He highlighted its unique characteristics: an open society that welcomed foreigners, unlike Sparta's practice of xenolasia that literally means expulsion of foreigners. He proudly stated that Athenians valued character and natural bravery over rigid, laborious military training. Athenians, he said, were willing to face dangers with ease of mind, confident in their adaptable and diverse forces.
So, implicitly criticizing the Spartan way of life.
Oh, definitely. He implicitly criticized Sparta's intense, lifelong, laborious training and its isolationism. He contrasted Athenian forces, adaptable and diverse, attacking hostile territory often alone, with Spartan invasions always needing all their allies tagging along.
And he talked about Athens' legacy, didn't he?
Yes, he asserted that Athens' power and actions would be admired by this and future generations, requiring no Homer to sing our praises. What he meant by this was that Athens' deeds spoke louder than any poet's words.
Their achievements were their monument.
Precisely. Their accomplishments were so grand they created a legacy that would endure through factual monuments and achievements, not fictional embellishment. He said they had left lasting monuments of our acts of harm and good across every sea and land. It was a profound statement about the tangible impact of their civic virtues and their imperial reach, a truly inspiring vision for the city.
But then, almost immediately after this soaring speech about Athenian greatness and ideals came a truly devastating and completely unforeseen blow: the plague. How did Thucydides describe this, and what was its impact beyond just the sickness itself?
The plague in Athens was an unforeseen and utterly devastating blow, arriving right on the heels of Pericles' inspiring words. It's a brutal contrast. Thucydides, perhaps drawing on the emerging Hippocratic medical writing of the time, which was quite advanced for its day, provides this incredibly detailed, almost clinical account of the plague's symptoms.
What kind of details does he give?
He describes a horrific head-to-toe sequence of suffering, fever, throat inflammation, sneezing, chest pain, coughing, vomiting, spasms, skin lesions, extreme thirst, insomnia. Just awful. He notes that no single cure was established, and it devastated every sort of constitution, regardless of how strong or weak someone was beforehand. This very scientific, dispassionate description actually heightens the horror, making it feel brutally real, devoid of any mythical or divine explanation. He saw it as a natural, albeit terrible phenomenon.
And the impact went beyond the physical suffering, didn't it? You mentioned societal breakdown.
Yes, absolutely. Beyond the sheer physical suffering, the plague had a far more insidious impact. It was, as Thucydides grimly observed, the starting point for greater lawlessness in the city.
How so? What changed?
Well, with so many dying and the usual structures of society just breaking down under the strain, people became bolder about activities they had previously enjoyed only in secret. They saw the sudden random deaths of both the rich and the poor, the pious and the impious, and realized there was a frightening lack of accountability.
Like, what does it matter how I behave if I could be dead tomorrow?
Exactly that kind of despair. If you saw your neighbor, who followed all the rules, die just as quickly as someone who broke them all, what incentive was there to maintain moral standards or religious customs? Despair led to this profound disregard for laws, both human and divine. This horrifying episode dramatically juxtaposes the noble ideals expressed in the funeral oration with the brutal reality of human vulnerability and moral decay under extreme stress. It's a stark reminder of how quickly societal norms can just unravel when faced with overwhelming catastrophe.
The war clearly forced the Athenians to confront their own principles, didn't it? Making choices that revealed the harsh realities of power and empire. These next two debates you mentioned really put that on display. What's the first one?
Yes, this truly raises an important question. How did Thucydides so brilliantly capture the timeless dilemmas faced by societies through these two pivotal debates? First, we have the Mytilene debate in Book 3. This is a really fierce discussion over how to punish a revolting allied city mightily.
They revolted against Athenian rule.
They did, and the Athenians recaptured the city. So now they faced a critical choice about how to reassert their authority. Should they be harsh to make an example, or should they be lenient?
Enter Cleon. Right. He had some strong opinions.
He certainly did. Cleon, a prominent Athenian politician known for his, let's say, aggressive rhetoric, argued for a harsh, uncompromising approach. He believed that a democracy like Athens actually struggles to rule an empire effectively because its daily life, being relatively free of fears and conspiracies, often leads to softness toward allies.
He thought democracy made them weak rulers.
In a sense, yes. He bluntly asserted that empire is a tyranny and that obedience from subject states comes from might rather than goodwill, not from favors or kindness. Therefore, he argued that a severe punishment death for all Mytilenean men and enslavement for the women and children was necessary as a clear example to deter any future revolts.
Wow, that's incredibly harsh. Kill everyone.
That was his proposal. He even criticized the Athenians for treating speeches in the assembly like spectacles rather than serious deliberations, urging them to act decisively based on cold reality, not sentiment.
That sounds incredibly harsh and, well, cynical. Was there truly no other way for Athens to maintain control, or was Cleon just playing to the fears of the crowd?
That's a critical question, and fortunately for the Mytileneans, there was a powerful counterargument. Diodotos, another Athenian, stepped up to counter Cleon's harsh realism. While he acknowledged Mytilene's guilt, he argued that the death penalty was simply not an effective deterrent for human nature.
Why not?
He believed that hope and desire, often aided by fortune or luck, would always drive men to take risks, regardless of how severe the punishment might be. People always think they might succeed where others failed. Instead, Diodotos argued it was more expedient for Athens, more practical in the long run, to offer the possibility of repentance and moderate punishment.
What was his reasoning for that?
His reasoning was that this approach would encourage other cities to surrender early if they ever revolted, preserving their economic strength, their people, their resources for Athens' revenue, rather than forcing them to resist to the bitter end, which would just result in ruined cities and costly sieges for Athens. He urged Athens to base its security on vigilance of our actions, not on the threat of our laws, emphasizing practicality and long-term benefit over vengeful severity.
So, a more pragmatic approach focused on Athens' own interests. What was the outcome?
In a remarkable turn of events, the Athenians initially voted for Cleon's harsh proposal. But then, overnight, many had second thoughts. The next day, they held another debate, and after Diodotus' speech, they reconsidered. They dispatched a second ship with the new orders, which rowed frantically and arrived just in time to prevent the full massacre, sparing the lives of most of the Mytilenean population.
Just in time. That's dramatic.
Incredibly dramatic. However, it wasn't a total reprieve. The ringleaders of the revolt, about 1,000 men, were still executed, and Mytilene's land was taken by Athenian clerics.
What are clerics exactly?
Clerics were essentially Athenian citizens sent out to settle on confiscated land in allied territories. It was a way to reward Athenian citizens, relieve population pressure, and maintain control. So Mytilene still paid a heavy price. But this debate offers such a powerful insight into the complexities of statecraft. That agonizing balance between justice and expediency and the enduring debate over whether severe punishment or moderation is more effective in maintaining control. It shows a democracy grappling with the moral and pragmatic implications of its own power, and in this case, choosing mercy, albeit a limited one.
And then we move from that debate about expediency to the incredibly stark and often chilling Melian dialogue in Book 5. This one seems to strip away all pretense of morality altogether. What happened here?
The Melian dialogue is perhaps one of the most famous and, yes, chilling passages in Thucydides. It's a stark conversation about power and morality, or maybe the lack thereof. The context is this. The Athenians besieged the neutral island of Melos. Melos hadn't done anything aggressive. They just wanted to stay out of the war.
They were neutral.
Exactly. In the dialogue Thucydides presents, Athenian representatives speak directly to the Melian leaders, making absolutely no pretense of justice or the gods or honor. Their argument is brutally pragmatic. The stark, brutal takeaway from Melos is this. When the strong talk to the weak, justice and morality often just go out the window.
What was the core of the Athenian argument?
The Athenians openly declare that, quote, The rule has always existed that the weaker is held down by the stronger. They tell the Melians that their own self-interest demands they submit, because, in their famous words, what is right is decided by the fact that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
Wow. Right, makes right, basically.
That's the essence of it. To Athens, Melian neutrality wasn't an option because it set a dangerous precedent. They feared it could encourage other subjects in their empire to revolt, implying that if Athens allowed a small neutral island to defy it, it might embolden larger, more strategically important states to do the same. Neutrality itself was seen as a threat to their power.
So, the Malians, facing this overwhelming power and this brutal logic, they still tried to appeal to something higher. They must have known the odds were against them.
They did. They knew the odds. But the Malians appealed to justice, to the favor of the gods, arguing the gods would support a just cause, to the shame of submission without a fight, and to the hope, perhaps a faint hope, that Sparta, as a Philodorian state, would eventually come to their aid. Despite the Athenians' relentless, cold logic, the Malians chose to resist, clinging to their hope and their pride.
And the outcome.
The outcome, as Thucydides coldly recounts, was tragic and swift. The Malians eventually surrendered after a harsh siege. The Athenians executed all the men of military age, enslaved the women and children, and settled the island with their own Athenian colonists. Wiped them out.
Just brutal.
Utterly brutal. This dialogue is considered a foundational text in international relations, famously illustrating realpolitik.
Realpolitik. Can you break that down?
Sure. Realpolitik is basically the idea that politics, especially international relations, should be based on practical considerations of national interest and power, rather than on moral or ethical concerns. The Melian dialogue is the classic example. It underscores Athens' intolerance of neutrality and reveals the brutal logic of empire when faced with resistance.
And if we connect these two debates, Madeleine and Melos, what does that progression show us?
It shows a disturbing progression in Athenian thinking, I think. In the Mytilenean debate, they still argued about the expediency of haughtiness, weighing pragmatism against severity, considering the long-term consequences. By the time of the Melian dialogue, maybe 15 years later, it had evolved into the unapologetic imposition of power. There was no real debate presented, just an assertion of might makes right. The moral compass of Athens, under the intense pressures of war and empire, had clearly shifted dramatically. It shows you how quickly principles can erode when survival, or simply the expansion of power, is on the line.
The Peloponnesian War was clearly far from predictable then. Filled with these unexpected turns, strategic blunders, and these profound internal conflicts that really tested the very fabric of Greek society. It wasn't just about massive battles between Athens and Sparta, was it?
Not at all. And what's fascinating here is how ingenuity, political turmoil, and just basic human psychology shaped events on and off the battlefield, often in really surprising ways. One such moment was the capture of Sphacteria, described in Book 4. This was a surprising Athenian victory that severely demoralized Sparta.
How did that come about? It sounds unexpected.
It started with Athenian boldness at Pylos. Pylos is a naturally strong site in Messenia, which was Spartan territory. Initially, the Athenian generals were reluctant, but one general, Demosthenes, not the famous orator but a military man, pushed to fortify Pylos. This location was particularly significant because it was seen as a potential base for Messenian helots to revolt.
Helots, those were the state-owned slaves in Sparta, right? A constant source of fear for them.
Exactly. A helot revolt was Sparta's worst nightmare. So occupying Pylos was a direct poke at Sparta's internal weakness. The Spartans, initially unconcerned and actually caught up at a religious festival, were caught completely off guard. They thought the Athenians would withdraw or be easily overcome.
A serious miscalculation.
A disastrous one. It resulted in a Spartan force being trapped on the nearby island of Sphacteria, cut off by the Athenian navy. Now, the Athenians faced challenges too, mainly getting food and water during the siege. But the Spartans also showed ingenuity trying to supply their trapped men.
How did they manage that?
They called for volunteers, offering high pay and even freedom to helots who successfully delivered food, things like grain, wine, cheese, to the trapped men. They used boats under cover of darkness, or even divers who towed skins full of poppy seed mixed with honey and linseed underwater.
Right.
It really highlights the resourcefulness on both sides during a desperate siege.
And this is where Cleon, the Athenian demagogue we met earlier, makes his outrageous promise, right? What happened there?
Indeed. Back in Athens, Cleon, and remember, a demagogue is a political leader who appeals to popular desires and prejudices rather than using rational argument, despite not being present at Pylos as a general, audaciously boasted in the assembly that he could capture the trapped Spartans within just 20 days.
That sounds like pure political grandstanding. Did anyone believe him?
Many were skeptical, but he played it cleverly. And shockingly, he actually pulled it off, working alongside the general Demosthenes at Pylos. Thucydides, in a really striking comparison, likens this event to Thermopylae, the legendary stand of the Spartans against the Persians, but quickly adds to compare small things with great, highlighting the ironic contrast between Sparta's legendary invincibility and its current embarrassing weakness.
Because Spartans weren't supposed to surrender, ever.
Exactly. For Spartans, especially their hoplites, those heavily armed citizen soldiers, the absolute backbone of Greek armies to surrender was practically unheard of. It went against their entire ethos. This incident profoundly shocked the Greek world. The myth of Spartan military superiority was genuinely shattered. It was a huge psychological blow to Sparta and a massive boost for Athens.
But the war wasn't just fought between states. As you mentioned, it also tore societies apart from within. You highlighted the chilling civil war in Corcyra. This sounds like it gets really ugly.
It does, and this is a crucial point, offering perhaps one of Thucydides' most profound and timeless analyses, his observations on the psychology of political revolution, which he details in Book 3 regarding Corcyra. In the civil war there, fought between the Democrats, supported by Athens, and the oligarchs, supported by Sparta, the breakdown of norms was extreme. It went beyond just violence.
How so? What did he observe?
He observed an inversion of the usual verbal evaluations of actions. Words themselves lost their meaning, or rather, their meanings were twisted to serve factional hatred. For example, irrational recklessness was now considered courageous commitment. So if you acted wildly without thinking, you were seen as brave and loyal to the cause.
And caution was seen as cowardice.
Exactly. Hesitation, even if prudent, became high-styles cowardice. Moderation was dismissed as a cover for lack of manhood, and careful thought or circumspection meant inaction. Conversely, senseless anger now helped to define a true man, and planning for security was dismissed as a specious excuse for dereliction. He noted that the man of violent temper was always trusted, while anyone opposing him was automatically suspect. Even succeeding through outright deception was praised as intelligence.
That sounds terrifyingly familiar to modern political polarization, the breakdown of language itself.
It's incredibly resonant, isn't it? And this profound moral decay extended to the most fundamental human relationships. Thucydides writes, kinship became alien compared with party affiliation, because political loyalty now demanded drastic action with less hesitation, even against family. Oaths and attempts at reconciliation were purely temporary, lasting only as long as neither side found some other source of power to gain an advantage.
Trust completely evaporated.
Completely. He says the one who first recovered his confidence and saw the other off guard enjoyed vengeance more if it was accomplished through deception, because not only did they ensure their own safety, but by prevailing through trickery, they also won the prize for intelligence. It's this profound and timeless analysis of political polarization and moral decay, where the ruthless pursuit of power corrupts language, erodes trust, and shatters fundamental human relationships, making society almost unrecognizable to itself. It's a chilling reminder of what happens when the fabric of society unravels from within.
And while all this internal strife was happening, the war continued on the external front. Sparta was making strategic moves to destabilize the Athenian Empire, especially with Brasidas' campaign up in Thrace.
Absolutely. Brasidas' campaign in Thrace, detailed in Book 4, was Sparta's major strategic attempt to hit Athens, where it hurt by undermining its empire in the north, an area rich in timber and mines, vital for Athens' navy and finances. Brasidas, a truly brilliant Spartan general, led an expedition there and was remarkably successful.
How did he succeed? Was it just military force?
Not entirely. He successfully encouraged several Athenian allies, key cities like Amphipolis, to revolt. He achieved this often by offering surprisingly moderate terms of surrender, playing on local grievances against Athens. He swayed local populations who were tired of Athenian demands and tribute payments. He was a master of diplomacy as much as warfare, charismatic and persuasive.
And the Athenian response to this was critical, right? And it directly involves Thucydides, the historian himself.
Yes, this is where Thucydides, the writer, enters his own story as an actor. As an Athenian general, strategos, Thucydides sailed with 7 ships to defend the area. He managed to secure the port town of Aeon, but Brasidas captured the much more important city of Amphipolis just before Thucydides could arrive to relieve it.
And that failure had consequences for Thucydides personally.
Huge consequences. Thucydides' failure to save Amphipolis led to his exile from Athens for 20 years. which, ironically, is what gave him the opportunity and the detached perspective to travel, gather information from both sides, and write his incredible history. A personal failure became a gain for posterity.
A strange twist of fate. And did Brasidas' campaign have wider political effects?
Yes, it did. Following Brasidas' successes in the region, the nearby city of Megara, a key strategic location near Athens, underwent a swift and violent political change. The democratic faction sympathetic to Athens was overthrown, an extreme oligarchy rule by a very small, wealthy elite was established, and those perceived as pro-Athenian were executed or exiled. This illustrates how the external war constantly exacerbated internal political divisions all across the Greek world. Cities often experienced these shifts towards oligarchy or democracy, depending on their internal factions, and which major power, Sparta or Athens, seemed to have the upper hand nearby. These military and political struggles, though often localized, deeply impacted the broader course of the war and would eventually lead to a temporary, very uneasy peace.
Then we come to what is perhaps the biggest gamble of the entire war, maybe one of the biggest in ancient history, the Sicilian expedition. This sounds like a true epic tale of ambition and ultimately devastating defeat that really changed the course of Greek history.
Oh, absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Sicilian expedition vividly illustrates the dangers of unchecked ambition, collective irrationality, and just profound strategic miscalculation. The fateful debate in the Athenian assembly over whether to even invade Sicily is a masterclass in contrasting arguments and political psychology.
Who are the main voices in that debate?
On one side, you had Nicias. He was a seasoned, respected general, quite cautious by nature. He argued passionately against the expedition. He highlighted the immense scale of the undertaking. Sicily was huge, distant, and powerful. He stressed the strength of Syracuse, the main target city, which had its own powerful navy, strong cavalry, which Athens lacked, and crucially, its own local grain supply, meaning it couldn't be easily starved out.
So Nicias was urging caution, pointing out all the risks.
Exactly. He insisted they would need a massive, completely self-sufficient force if they went. He warned them against relying on the promises of money from their Sicilian allies, the Aegistans, predicting it would be mainly just talk. He spoke of the disgrace of having to beg for reinforcements later if they planned carelessly from the start. His aim was clear. Either dissuade them entirely or, failing that, ensure the safest possible conditions by demanding such huge resources that they might balk at the cost.
And who argued for the expedition? That was Alcibiades, wasn't it?
Yes, countering Nicias was Alcibiades, young, brilliant, charismatic, ambitious, and deeply controversial. He argued forcefully for the expedition. He appealed directly to Athens' need for prestige and the glory of expanding its empire. He boldly declared that if certain factions in Sicily took their side, Athens could quite probably be the rulers of all Hellas. Total domination.
A much more ambitious vision. How did he persuade people?
He shrewdly appealed to the youth's longing for adventure, faraway sights and experiences, and, very pragmatically, to the common people's desire for earning money in the military through extended service and potential plunder. He painted this glittering picture of glory, power, and endless financial gain. He was a master orator, incredibly persuasive at swaying public opinion.
So despite Nicias' detailed logical warnings, the Athenians were swept up in this grand vision. It sounds like a perfect storm of overconfidence and wishful thinking.
Precisely. Despite Nicias' incredibly detailed warnings about the difficulties, Thucydides says the Athenians were afflicted with a passion for the expedition. They grew much more urgent about it. And here's the psychological twist. They paradoxically became convinced that Nicias' very demands for such a massive force meant there would be full security now.
So his attempt to scare them off backfired. They thought, if we send that much, we can't possibly lose.
Exactly. They saw his caution not as a warning, but as proof that they could succeed if they just committed enough resources. And crucially, those who felt unhappy or had doubts were afraid of seeming unpatriotic by an opposing vote, and so they kept quiet. This is just a classic tragic example of hubris and collective irrationality, where the allure of glory and profit, combined with intense peer pressure and patriotism, led to a disastrous overcommitment based on inflated hopes and suppressed dissent. It's a powerful lesson in groupthink and its dangers, and the expedition was plagued by complications and intrigue even before it truly began. Just before departure, Athenian religious statues known as herms were mysteriously mutilated overnight.
Herms, what were they?
They were these square pillars topped with the head of the god Hermes, often with an erect phallus. They were placed all over Athens, at doorways, crossroads, in the marketplace. They were sacred boundary markers and symbols of protection and good fortune. So their mass defacement wasn't just vandalism. It was seen as a deeply unsettling religious sacrilege, a very bad omen.
People must have been terrified.
They were. It caused widespread fear of hidden, oligarchic, and tyrannical conspiracies within Athens. People suspected anti-democratic groups were trying to undermine the city and the expedition from within, creating this atmosphere of paranoia right before the fleet sailed. And then Alcibiades himself was implicated, not just in the Hermes affair, but also in allegedly profaning the sacred Eleusinian mysteries.
So he was recalled.
He was recalled to Athens to face trial. Fearing conviction, and perhaps rightly so given the political climate, he fled. And spectacularly, he defected to Sparta.
Defected.
To the enemy.
To the enemy. And worse for Athens, he offered crucial strategic advice to the Spartans, including telling them to establish a permanent fort at Decelea in Attica, right in Athens' backyard. This would become a constant thorn in Athens' side for the rest of the war, allowing Sparta to perpetually harass Athenian territory year-round, not just during summer campaigns. Alcibiades' defection was a massive blow.
So the expedition itself in Sicily, how did it go initially? In Sicily, the campaign saw some early Athenian advantages. They landed, won an initial land battle near Syracuse, but they immediately faced unexpectedly strong Syracusan cavalry, which signaled a significant challenge, as cavalry was an Athenian weakness. The Syracusans, importantly, began to adapt and learn from their early mistakes, especially under the skilled leadership of their general Hermocrates.
What did Hermocrates do?
Hermocrates advocated for unity and, crucially, a reduction in the number of generals commanding the Syracusan forces from 15 down to just a few. He argued this would allow for tighter secrecy and more efficient preparations. He also pushed for rigorous training for their hoplite infantry. They weren't just going to rely on their walls.
And they tried diplomacy too, right? Trying to win allies.
Yes. In a debate at Camarina, a strategically important neutral city nearby, Hermocrates warned the Camarinians about Athens' true imperial aims, urging them to join Syracuse against the invaders. Euphemos, the Athenian envoy sent to counter him, gave what Thucydides calls a mendacious speech, meaning deliberately deceptive, claiming Athens' aims were limited and purely defensive. Camarine ultimately decided to remain neutral, but Thucydides notes that due to its proximity to Syracuse, it secretly began to favor the Syracusans. Even in these remote cities, the great power struggle was playing out through argument and shifting allegiances.
And then the ultimate disaster. The naval catastrophe in Syracuse Harbor. How on earth did Athens, the great naval power, lose so decisively at sea? That seems almost unbelievable.
It was the absolute turning point, and it's a masterclass in tactical adaptation by the Syracusans. They analyzed the earlier naval skirmishes and realized the Athenians relied on their superior speed and maneuverability, especially a tactic called the dikeblos, sailing through gaps in the enemy line and ramming them from the side or rear. This required open water.
So the Syracusans changed their tactics.
And their ships. They innovated brilliantly. They shortened and strengthened their ships' prows, the front part used for ramming, and added thick anchor blocks and internal braces. This made their ships heavier and less maneuverable, but much stronger for head-on collisions. It allowed them to ram the Athenians head-on in the confined space of the Great Harbor, completely neutralizing the Athenian advantage in maneuverability.
They turned the cramped harbor space to their advantage.
Exactly. The Athenians, meanwhile, were facing immense logistical challenges. Disease was spreading through their camp, supplies were dwindling, and they suffered repeated naval defeats, which was a huge psychological blow, a total reversal of their usual experience as the masters of the sea. They were in a completely dejected state. Nicetas, despite being gravely ill himself, delivered a final desperate exhortation to his demoralized troops, appealing to their freedom and their unique, untrammeled daily life back in Athens as a reason to fight on.
But it wasn't enough.
No. In the climactic naval battle, the Syracusans decisively defeated the Athenian fleet in the packed, chaotic harbor. The Athenian sailors were so stunned by the defeat, so demoralized, they actually refused Nicias' pleas to reboard their remaining ships for one final desperate attempt to break out. Their spirit was broken.
So they were trapped. What happened then? The land retreat?
Yes, the naval catastrophe forced the entire Athenian army. Thucydides estimates no fewer than 40,000 men, including soldiers, sailors, and camp followers, to attempt a retreat by land through hostile Sicilian territory. It was a journey of immense suffering. Thucydides describes him as resembling a city stealing away after capitulation to a siege, and no small city at that.
A whole city on the move, defeated.
Defeated, stripped of their dignity, forced to carry their own meager food supplies, abandoning their sick and wounded, enduring constant harassment from Syracusan cavalry and light troops. It was a scene of general degradation. Both parts of the retreating army, one led by Demosthenes, the other by Nicias, eventually surrendered under brutal conditions.
What happened to the generals?
Demosthenes' men were promised their lives wouldn't be taken, but that promise wasn't kept. Both generals, Demosthenes and Nicias, were eventually captured and, as Thucydides puts it circumspectly, treated harshly. They were executed by the Syracusans against the wishes of the Spartan commander Gylippus, who had aided them.
And Thucydides has a final comment on Nicias, doesn't he?
He does. He expresses profound pity for Nicias, stating he was least deserving of all the leans of my time of coming to such an end, given his conventional piety and his entire life directed entirely toward virtue, despite his fatal role in leading the expedition he had argued against. Thucydides portrays the entire expedition as the greatest reversal for any Hellenic army. They went out expecting to enslave others, and ended up fearing enslavement themselves, their journey marked by ill omens instead of the victory songs they expected. It's just this powerful, tragic testament to the dangers of hubris and strategic overreach, a classic example of how a mighty power can be brought incredibly low by a single catastrophic error in judgment.
The Sicilian disaster could have shattered Athens completely. I mean, losing that many men, that many ships, it's almost unimaginable. But what happened next shows this incredible capacity for resilience and self-reinvention. How did they possibly pull themselves back from the brink?
It's truly remarkable, and what's fascinating here is Athens' ability to navigate intense political turmoil and find renewed strength even after such a catastrophic defeat. The initial reaction to the disaster in Athens was, understandably, disbelief. Thucydides says they simply would not believe the news, even from the few shattered survivors who made it back.
Denial.
Total denial. Then came anger. Anger at the politicians and orators who had promoted the expedition, anger at the oracle mongers who predicted success. This was followed by sheer terror and the most extreme consternation. They faced utter financial and military devastation, bereft of many hoplites and cavalry, and of a flowering of youth whose like they could see nowhere. They had lost so much, they were practically without hope of survival, surrounded by emboldened enemies.
And yet, they didn't collapse. What role did Alcibiades play now from exile?
Even from exile, Alcibiades continued to exert influence, playing a complex game. Having worn out his welcome in Sparta, he had moved over to Asia Minor and cultivated a relationship with the powerful Persian satrap Tissaphernes, a Persian provincial governor who controlled resources Sparta desperately needed.
Playing both sides.
Absolutely. Alcibiades shrewdly advised Tissaphernes to reduce the payments he was making to the Peloponnesian fleet, subtly undermining the Spartan war effort. And crucially, he also sent messages back to influential figures in the Athenian fleet at Samos, hinting that Persia could become an Athenian ally and provide much-needed gold if Athens abandoned its radical democracy and adopted a more moderate or oligarchic form of government, one that people like Alcibiades himself and the Persians could deal with more easily.
So he was using the Persian connection as leverage to engineer a political change back home.
Exactly. He set the stage for a dramatic political shift in Athens, showing his continued cunning and ambition even while in exile.
So an oligarchic coup actually happened. Did they overthrow the democracy? But it didn't last, did it? How did all that play out?
No, it didn't last. But yes, the coup happened. Influential Athenians back home, seeing the city's desperate, weakened state, and persuaded by Alcibiades' promises, passed through intermediaries, believed that a smaller, more efficient oligarchic group could rule more effectively and, crucially, secure that vital Persian support. This led to the oligarchic coup of the 400 described in Book 8. They intimidated the Democratic Assembly and assumed absolute power over the intimidated city.
Who were the key figures in this coup?
Thucydides named several key figures. Antiphon, a man highly skilled in speech and judgment, who Thucydides says later made the best defense of anyone up to his time when he was put on trial for his role. Phrynichus, another leader, who was particularly zealous and deeply feared Alcibiades' potential return, seeing him as a rival. And Theramenes, who was prominent in the initial overthrow but later played a role in undermining the 400 himself, a complex figure.
But the Athenian fleet didn't accept this.
Critically, no. The Athenian fleet and the thousands of soldiers stationed on the island of Samos, who were fiercely democratic and represented the power of the common citizens, the Phaeacians who rowed the ships, resisted the coup. They exposed the oligarchic conspiracy back in Athens, held their own assembly, formally deposed the 400 in absentia, and even voted to recall Alcibiades, hoping his influence with Tissaphernes could genuinely save them and restore democracy.
So you had two rival Athenian governments for a time, the oligarchy in Athens, the democracy with the fleet at Samos.
Essentially, yes. It was an incredibly unstable situation. Internal dissent against the 400 grew rapidly in Athens itself. They failed to secure peace with Sparta or the promised Persian aid, and people grew suspicious. The breaking point came when the hoplites, the armored infantry stationed in the Athens' port, began demolishing new fortifications the oligarchs were building, fearing they were meant to let the Spartans in.
How did they challenge the 400?
They rallied under a clever, cautious slogan. Whoever wanted the 5,000 to rule instead of the 400 should get to work. This was a smart way to suggest a broader, more moderate government based on those wealthy enough to afford hoplite armor, the 5,000, without explicitly calling for the full democracy, the people, which might have seemed too radical or provoked harsher repression at that moment. The 400 were quickly deposed, and power was entrusted to this intermediate government of the 5,000.
And what did Thucydides think of this 5,000 government?
His assessment is really telling and quite famous. He calls it, "The Athenians clearly had their best government, at least in my lifetime, for a moderate blending between the few oligarchs and the many democrats came about. And it was this which first lifted the city out of the terrible current condition of its affairs." He saw it as a moment of pragmatic political genius, finding a stable middle ground that allowed Athens to recover.
And finally, despite everything, a naval revival that brought renewed hope against all odds. That really is incredible.
It is astonishing. Despite the immense losses from Sicily, despite the near civil war and the political chaos, the Athenians, particularly the fleet operating from Samos, now under the restored democracy and eventually joined by Alcibiades, achieved crucial naval victories. For example, the Battle of Cynossema and the Hellespont, the vital strait controlling the grain route from the Black Sea.
Why was that battle so important?
They captured numerous Peloponnesian ships, and more importantly, they won. This victory restored courage and critical hope in Athens. It made them believe that their cause was still capable of prevailing if they embraced it zealously. It demonstrates the remarkable resilience of Athens, the skill of its sailors, and the flexibility of its political system, adapting even in the face of near-total ruin. It's a powerful testament to the fact that even after seemingly insurmountable disaster, a society can find the inner strength to reinvent itself and fight on, showing that the human spirit, even embodied in a city-state, can be remarkably, stubbornly resilient.
So, after journeying through all of this with Thucydides, what does it all mean for us today? He offers more than just history, doesn't he? It feels like he provides this profound mirror to human nature and the timeless dynamics of power.
Absolutely. This really raises an important question for all of us, doesn't it? What can we ultimately take away from this deep dive into Thucydides? To sort of recap the core insights, we've seen his unique historical method, the relentless quest for objectivity, the reliance on verifiable evidence, and his brilliant use of speeches to give us insight into human motivation and psychology. We've explored the complex, often brutal interplay of power and human nature in conflict. How primal forces like fear, especially Sparta's fear of Athens and the desire for prestige, and simple self-interest drive states toward war and empire building.
And the dangers of ambition.
Oh yes, we witness the tragic consequences of unchecked ambition and disastrous miscalculation of the Sicilian expedition, a stark, enduring warning about overreach and the perils of collective enthusiasm overriding rational caution. And yet, we also saw the surprising resilience and political adaptability of a society under immense pressure, able to literally change its own form of government in the midst of crisis to survive.
And those observations on civil strife in Coursera, the inversion of words, that still feels incredibly relevant to understanding political polarization today.
Frighteningly relevant. So, considering the Athenians' whole journey through this war, their initial high-minded democratic ideals articulated by Pericles, then the brutal harshness of the Melian dialogue, where might makes right, the collective passion leading to the Sicilian disaster, and finally their eventual internal political shifts to find stability after a near collapse. Here's a final thought, a reflective question perhaps for you, our listener. What lessons can you draw about the inherent tensions between a society's stated values, its ideals, and the pragmatic, often ruthless demands of power, especially when faced with an existential crisis?
That tension between what we say we believe and what we do when we're pushed.
Exactly. It's a question that echoes through Thucydides' work and, I think, through all of human history. It invites us to reflect on our own choices, individually and collectively, when our principles collide head-on with necessity or perceived necessity. It's something to really mull over.